All right, hey everybody, welcome to another Ninja RMM MSP live chat. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. This is a very interactive event. I think you're going to see this handled a little bit differently. Can't wait to show you how that's going to work. For those of you who are joining us again, thank you so much for taking time, especially when there's so much out there in terms of virtual events. So appreciate you coming back. And I want to welcome our guest back too. So Tom, first of all, thanks for being here. You want to say a little bit about who you are?
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, I'm here as Ninja's Channel Chief Advisor, and I came out in this role beginning of this year. I'm a former MSP owner, and I produce these MSP live chats with Jonathan. Looking forward to this, and it's great to be doing yet another one of these with Kevin Clune of MSP Growth Hacks.
Yeah, hey, Kevin.
Hey, thanks for having me. So I'm Kevin Clune, co-founder and editor of MSP Growth Hacks, author of the MSP Growth Funnel, and just MSP coach as well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and what's cool about both of you guys, and so both of you have MSP backgrounds, obviously. So Tom, former owner, and actually you're one of those owners who sales was your thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. That was the part once I figured out that was going to drive my business and that I enjoyed it. That's where I kind of spent the majority of my time my last few years as an owner. And that's what propelled me to be able to sell the business. And it's probably my favorite topic to talk about when it comes to MSP business.
So you are a diamond in the rough, my friend. I'm glad we have you. And then Kevin, I mean, you've got before MSP Growth Hacks, I mean, you were at MSP as well, and you were running sales and marketing and operations for them. That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. And really the way I got into managed services was, almost by accident. I was a marketer first and ended up, working with an MSP and then ended up joining that company later on. And so I've always had a different perspective because I come from a marketing first approach. And then it wasn't until I was responsible for doing the operations and things like that that I really got to know the managed services business.
But you were doing some really cool stuff. I mean, we were talking in the lead up to this. Obviously, we're going to be sharing lots of stories. Like you're going to be sharing from your experience there. Also, some of the stuff that you're doing with MSP Growth Hacks that's really cool. Tom's going to be sharing anecdotes from his experience too. And then I want to stress that this is not all about the three of us. This is a time for all of you guys to connect with each other who are live here and share what's going on with you, what's working, what's not. Use this as an opportunity to all be connected with one another and participate. And so feel free to use the chat. For anyone who's new here and hasn't used Crowdcast before, you'll notice that it's a lot like Zoom. There's the chat window over there. There's a polls down on the bottom bar there. And you'll see that we launched one already. And if you want to jump in there, we're running this like a choose your own adventure. You control us. Tell us what to do. What do you want to hear about first? This topic has a lot we can cover. We got a lot of stats, a lot of examples, tons of stuff. And so tell us what you want to hear first. We'll make sure we do that. And then questions. Normally you would use ask a question to ask a question, obviously. What we want to do is something a little different. We are doing a contest here to get everyone actually paying attention and involved and sharing. We want to use the ask a question feature to do a contest where you can input your best sales subject line for an email. And so what we'll do is like you can put that in there as a suggestion, and then everyone has the ability to upvote. And so at the end of this session, the person who has submitted the most upvoted subject line is going to walk away with a $50 Amazon gift card. And so definitely feel free to go in now. If there is something that you've used recently that's worked really well, feel free to add it in there. Or if you're feeling like you've got a funny subject line and you want to get out there, feel free to put that in at any time. And that's how we're going to choose who walks home with the $50 gift card. So before I move any further, I want to confirm a couple of things. First, this is being recorded. So if you have to duck away or if you got team members who you want to share this with afterwards, we'll be following up with an email letting you know that the recording's live. But the cool thing about Crowdcast is the recording actually renders really quickly. Once the session's over, you can stick around or come back to the link, and the recording will be up pretty quickly. So that's something to look out for. I'm also going to share my screen right now, and Sammy, who is also on our marketing team, who's running admin stuff in the background. Thank you, Sammy. She put in the chat here, there's a link to the agenda doc that we're using. And you're going to see that on your screen right now. So this is the doc that we'll use to, I'll put it in the chat too so you can actually have it. This is what we're going to use. Obviously, this is going to be an open discussion. You can ask questions in the chat. Tell us what you're interested in. We're going to call on people. If you have a story or experience right now with your sales nurturing, with your outreach that you want to share, you've got some interesting things going on or an issue that you're trying to work out that you want advice for, we're going to bring people on too. If you're comfortable with coming on screen, we'd love to have you. So this is going to be a winding conversation, but we've got this agenda doc that we can come back to. And you can also keep, now that you have this link, you'll have access to this for after the session's over. We'll update it with any additional resources we come up with. But there's also cool stats and links in here that you can check out as we go along or even after it's done. So it's kind of a living document that you'll walk away with. So to kick things off, guys, we've got the one poll that we launched. I want to launch a couple more. And the first one is, how is everyone currently capturing the most leads? I wanted to just say like leads period, but the poll limitation was you couldn't do checkboxes. You have to pick one. So what's everyone currently getting their most leads from? And so if you go down that, the options are, this could be anything from your contact us form on your website. You could be using a lead magnet, which could be like an ebook or a checklist, something like that. Chatbots, is anyone using chatbots? That'd be interesting to hear. Events, of course, in-person ones, not really happening so much. That's something that we covered last time in our last MSP live chat and some alternatives for that. People buying lists. I see there's a vote for that. And then referrals too. So yeah, let's check out this as this fills up. This will be interesting to kind of keep an eye on and kind of get a sense of where everybody's at. Kevin, you work with a ton of MSPs on their marketing. So what are you kind of seeing with your clients in terms of lead flow and the different things they're using to get leads incoming?
So it's interesting, and I see the votes piling up for referrals, and that, that is one of the most common things. And so even, for MSPs that are not super active on the marketing front, but just because you're getting a referral doesn't necessarily mean that you can't nurture it. So anytime you kind of engage with someone at that level, there is still, maybe you provide them a quote, maybe it doesn't necessarily go anywhere immediately, but there's no reason why that person might not now become a candidate for your services later on. And so, that's one of the things, if you do find out that, you're in this position, which looks like the majority right now in the poll, to where, that doesn't mean that this conversation doesn't apply.
Kevin, I'd like to point out too, when I see referrals, and it's common, and I went through this, referrals are great for growing a business at probably a steady, somewhat slow rate. When we're talking about active marketing, you kind of have to reach out beyond referrals. But also, to your point, what I often see and what I experienced is that, and Jonathan, I was telling you the story, that I realized that when I was still doing a lot of technical work on my MSP, I would spend time doing technical work and not following up on leads. I wasn't using a CRM. I wasn't, even if they were referrals, I wasn't putting them through. I wasn't tracking. I wasn't getting the right touches in. And the key point when I made the change to growing my MSP is when I decided that I was going to treat each referral or each lead that came in whatever way the same way and nurture them, as you said.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a big thing we're going to cover here, we're going to cover the different ways that people are following up on leads. A big reason that we're asking this question is where they're coming from. Is it can really make a difference what your outreach is like if it's an outbound cold email or call versus a call that you got inbound, someone just downloaded something or someone filled out a form. That's going to be obviously a very different way that you're going to follow up with those people. So that's kind of why we're asking this. And we're going to get into a lot of stats and things around information that's going to be helpful to get you started, even if you're in a position where you don't really have a lot set up on your site, where maybe you're not getting a ton of traffic and your lead flow is not huge. It's going to be information that will help you act on that stuff. And then what we can do too, like I said, I mean, this is this conversation is going to go any way you guys want it to. We could also veer off into what are some practical ways to do all that stuff and get it going if you don't have you don't have the resources to do a ton right now. If you've got limited amount of hours in the day. So thanks everybody for answering that. I got one more for you, and this isn't a poll so much as a question, and it's a little bit of like a gotcha question, but we'll see what people think. So, how many touches do you think it takes to get a sales meeting with a lead? And this is on average. So, of course, there's your own experience, and go ahead and feel free. I mean, the answer that we'll tell you in a second, that's the average for everybody, may be different from what you're seeing. And if that's the case, definitely get in the chat and kind of let us know. It'd be interesting to hear that. We got 1 vote so far on 2 to 4 touches, 1 5 to 7. I mean, just the range here, I don't know if that's surprising to people. This was kind of surprising to me. Or maybe this is a stat everyone knows already. If we go here in the doc. Oh, we got another person from Maine. Nice. Yeah, so we got about an even split between 2 to 4, 5 to 7. If you go in the doc here, I'm going to do a little magic trick, and I'm going to make this answer appear. And so, according to Inside Sales, which is a company that was recently acquired, but they did a ton of research around outbound sales calling, SDRs and AEs and sales calls, a ton of research around it. Their answer is 8 to 10 touches. And so no one's picking that, one person 14 to 16. That number floats around too, actually. And what's interesting about this Inside Sales report, which I'll share the link in just a second. Here, I'm going to put it in the chat so everybody can check it out. This report is full of stuff. You should definitely check it out. But what's interesting about this is people cite that number too, that there's, depending on where you go, people are going to say 10 touches, 16 touches now. The whole point is that it's more than just 1 or 2, right? And the Inside Sales report makes the point that some of these stats are actually coming from asking salespeople what they think they're doing. Inside Sales was actually looking at activities. And so salespeople tend to think they're doing more than what or say they're doing more than what they're really doing sometimes. And so the number they came out with was, okay, salespeople say they're doing around 15 touches on average. What they're actually doing is between 8 and 10. And so if we go into, go back to the doc here, I think that one of the things that calls up, it goes back to this point that you just made, Tom, is like, okay, 8 to 10 touches for every lead that comes in, or every lead that you get on a cold, on a list that you buy, like who's going to be doing that work? And so Tom, I mean, like when you started your MSP, this was you, right? I mean, you were the salesperson. How are you handling things?
Yeah, that's right. Well, the problem is that there's two. I think the big thing that happens here is the drop off. One, you've got to be using a CRM. You've got to put them in there. You've got to establish your touches. You can even in most CRMs set what those touches are going to be and how often. Schedule them going forward. I think what happens though, and when you see that 8 to 10 touches at many MSPs, you talk to someone or you get a referral or from a list, and they show mild interest. And then the second time they show mild interest, and then by the 3rd month, you stop contacting them. When the fact is a lot of those deals are going to close in months 6 through 10 or 6 through 12. And it's a matter of staying on top of those touches. So, and I think Kevin probably some points to this on the perspective of when those touches occur, and some of them may be later that actually lead to a close.
Yeah, absolutely. I like when we started in our MSP, kind of like when we started doing a large scale nurturing and automation campaign, it was kind of like we just bought a list. I think the first buy we made was like 5,000 contacts. And from there, it kind of just turned into, like, I picture like the Roadrunner cartoon where there's like a runaway train and you're just laying track in front of it. It was kind of like that. Like we were just building automation as we go. in order to just figure out, based on the data that we were getting back. And so it was, we were tracking really, like, we built a lead scoring system. We were trying to figure out where these people should go and what they should experience next. And then we started dumping more and more data into it. What we learned kind of through that process, though, is that, the more aggressive you are with your sales pitch and your messaging, it really dictates how long you can run that campaign. And so at first, when we were pretty aggressive with our messaging and we were basically like pushing, kind of what an MSP would expect to do. It's like free consultation, just trying to get in front of them to make a pitch. In those cases, we could only run those for a few months until we saw like a pretty large drop off. People were unsubscribing. We had a lot of people that were coming back and saying, like, stop emailing me. You know what I mean? The usual thing. And so that, I think what happens is people hit that point and they don't know where to go from there. And so they are paying attention to that small percent of feedback that they're getting, and not paying attention to all the other people that are kind of just quiet and have not yet responded. And so it kind of spooks them off the entire strategy. And so what we kind of did at that point was start putting more content mix into our emails. We started to take like a lesser aggressive approach, and we started to take, kind of the stance where like we want to have more longevity over these campaigns than we necessarily want to just immediately have a payoff in the first 3 weeks. And so that, I kind of picture it almost as, and if you're familiar with like American football, you're starting a drive, you're on the 20, you have 80 yards to go. A common play is to just try to throw an 80-yard pass, catch the defense off guard. But then when that doesn't work, then you have to play the small game and you have to work on like your short-term conversions. And so kind of that's what we started focusing on. It was more about, how do we get them from, this step to now the next step. Maybe it's not a consultation. Maybe you just want to get them to engage somehow, maybe attend an event, things like that. And then you have these kind of milestones along the way. And then through that, now you can see who's engaged and who's not.
So I just added a poll here because I'm interested in this. Is of everyone who's on, are you using content in sales emails? Or I guess another question is just for everybody in the chat, like, what do your sales emails look like right now? Are they primarily exactly what Kevin was just talking about, the free consultation, or, hey, let's get on a call right now? Oh, Jesse, we'll have to get Kevin to fix that. Jesse's cheating and going ahead to our special offer for MSP Spark, which we'll tell you about in a little bit later. But well, Kelvin, for example, thanks for being on, Kelvin. You're saying that around 1 to 3 touches per lead, and thank you for getting me to clarify. I've jumped ahead. I got too excited. Let's back up a second. When we talk about touches, what we're talking about in this context is a touch can be an email, a phone call, or a social interaction like a LinkedIn InMail to one prospect. And so,
or an in-person if you're an MSP.
Or an in-person, absolutely. Could be also a direct mail. It could be any kind of one activity. And so when we say that the average was 8 to 10, it's one salesperson to get one cold prospect on a call initially. On average, it was taking 8 to 10 activities. So Kelvin, you're doing something right because it's 1 to 3. That's
Don,
great.
I want to put that 8 to 10 in a very interesting perspective, anecdotally.
Sure.
So when I brought on a full-time salesperson, well, first of all, I wanted to transition to full-time sales, but I still had to run the company at a CEO level. So I was never full-time sales, but I brought on a full-time salesperson. And the first thing I did, and I didn't know the term now because I've now worked the vendor side for a couple of years, but the term is closed loss. And I think it's appropriate here because it might put that 8 to 10 in perspective, how you get as high as 10 before you get maybe an in-person to then close a deal. What I did was I said, hey, listen, I've been tracking these prospects in our CRM, and we were just using the CRM in our PSA for years. But a lot of them, I stopped doing the touches after 3 or 4, and some of them are pretty stale, a year or two old. I want you to go through and recontact all of those ones. And I would now call those kind of closed lost. Lost as in they didn't go anywhere, or I closed them out, or I just closed them out by default because I didn't continue to make those touches. And that salesperson went through and over the next 6 months closed at least 3 of those prospects that had been sitting there. And so those touches, the point I'm making is you can have something that you haven't touched for years and you can bring it back up and work back towards that 8 to 10 touches on something that you maybe have left behind. So I'd just like to speak to that. Maybe that list you have isn't as old or stale as you think. Maybe that person you even talked to a year, 2 years ago, maybe there's an in. And when you talk about this using content, that's a really good way to get back in with one of those ones that you weren't in touch with for a while.
Well, let's go into the choose your intervention portion. You guys said that you wanted to hear more about what a good cadence looks like. So I think what we can do, and of course, anything we show here is going to have the caveat of this is a big industry average, right? Things are going to be different for you and your own audience. But that said, according to Inside Sales, the way they divide it up is thinking about it in terms of what was the entrance. And this is something I know Kevin has some thoughts about too. But basically, you can have they divide cadences that are inbound leads. So like I mentioned at the top of the session here, those are leads who filled out the contact us forms, or they downloaded something, or maybe they attended an event. But they're warm in some way. They're not a purchase list. They're not completely cold. So they're saying that the optimal cadence of that they've seen has at least 3 different types of outreach. It's got either phone call, email, social, direct mail, something. That the more you do, and we have a stat right here. There's a 9.5%. I mean, some of these percentages they're a little specific here, but your chances of getting a contact raise if you're using different types of outreach. So you're not just doing a phone call. You're doing a phone call and an email, or a phone call and an in-mail. And so you have down here a kind of a example of a chart where they say, okay, here's 10 days. They're suggesting with inbound leads, because they're warm, you should start with the call quickly. And that actually gets into another stat that we have further down here, which is kind of one of those, it's been around forever now. People are just taking it to be a common truth. And that's, if you get an inbound lead, the speed that you're able to get in touch with them matters a lot. And so if you're able to get into, reach out to a contact as soon as 5 minutes, then your chances of actually reaching them and them picking up the phone, much higher than if you wait 5 minutes. If you wait 30 minutes, it drops off a ton. And so that goes back to a story that Tom was telling us before, where balancing that, like if you're in the situation where you're the person in charge of you're the owner and you're essentially the sales guy too, and you're the person responding to these inbound requests. Maybe you're not getting that many, but even if you're not getting a ton, it can still be the thing that you put on the back burner. Tom, do you want to talk about how that was a big issue for you kind of early on?
Yeah, I just found that, and Kevin and I and Jonathan were talking about this before, I found that I would start to do a marketing process. I would buy a list, or I would even just go to an event and gather a bunch of cards or something like that. And then I would maybe reach out one time, or I would, that list, I would send one email to, or I used to do, and this is going back a little bit, but it probably isn't the same. I did postcards that were actually very effective. But they weren't really effective unless there was another follow-on touch after that. Like a second, when I learned, it took me a long time to do a second postcard, a follow-up a month later, that's when I got a lot of calls, sending those postcards to the same list, which is very analogous to emails now. And my point is that I would start down one path, but I wouldn't continue down it. I would do a little bit in this one direction with a list I got, or with a call down campaign, or even to referrals, but I wouldn't continue on with them. And I think it's that getting that regular cadence of how you're going to keep touching those prospects until they start to hit. And it takes that. That's why they talk about this 8 to 10 touches. It just takes a lot more. And that say I look at that now and it sounds painful to have to reach out to someone 10 times. But the fact is, and I know Kevin, this is his expertise when at his MSP, was getting those multiple touches in and that regular cadence of doing so. And Kevin, can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, and so the way we approached it, and kind of going back to what Jonathan was saying too, is like, you don't treat someone that just put in their information to do an ebook download the same way as you treat someone that filled out your contact form and is like a potential, prospect right now. So the way that we really approach it is more of like, let's put everybody into different buckets, and then you start to nurture them on, based on their level of warmth. And so, these are different strategies for different types of scenarios. Now, if you have a lot of different types of opt-ins you're getting, you can see how this is now you're starting to like juggle so many different balls, and it's like, how can one small MSP do this? But in reality, this is also why I really like newsletters, because newsletters, if you do it on a weekly basis, it acts like a really good health check for your list. And so if you could send them to everybody, no matter how they opted in, and you start to really get to see, okay, like what is the engagement? And what we found is normally the people that we're now starting to reach back out on an inbound, let's say just we put out a newsletter. Now there was like an offer on there and somebody responded. That person never has a low lead score. They're always, kind of like a 5-star, 4-star contact, and they've been paying attention for a long time. And so, when you talk about doing a newsletter every week, it doesn't necessarily have to be some extravagant thing with like a ton of content. I actually think newsletters are trending in the opposite direction. It's like a short couple punches of just simple bites of information that people can grab onto, and just staying relevant in that, in that kind of repetition is what's important. And then what you're doing is you're trying to get feedback, every single time. You're not just sending it just to send it and for that immediate response. You're trying to gauge, okay, now this person has an open rate of this much. They're starting to engage. Maybe they haven't reached out yet, but you start to look at, okay, well, how many people have, and how many touches did it take to get to them? What we found, if you're doing just purely a newsletter and you're not doing any kind of email automations on top of that are more sales forward, you can still drive appointments. But like we've seen, it takes like 65 newsletters in order to get someone to reach out and respond. Like we've had people that have just been on the list for like a year and a half, and now they're finally ready. Maybe their contract with their existing provider's up, and so, what we try to do is once you start to see that they're starting to engage, now you can go the extra, you can do a spin-off kind of automation and do like maybe now, and this, I guess something we do even at MSP Growth Hacks is like every month we take a segment of our audience that is highly engaged and we just send them Amazon gift cards as a thank you. And so it, when people get that reward, it also is a great way to reach out to them and just to say thank you and make personal contact with them, but it's also a way now is like you've taken them 80% of the way with your nurturing, and now you're just trying to deliver value, and you're doing it in a way where you're only touching the most engaged contacts that you
have. Jonathan and Kevin, I don't know if you guys saw in the questions and answers, we have a question from Matt Erdy.
Okay.
On cold prospecting, what order do you suggest to run a sequence? Email, social, phone, direct, some other order? Does it matter?
I don't know that it necessarily matters. I think what the sequence is probably less important than the actual like frequency of each. And so, for example, like our automations were, we did email like for cold data, right? You put the list in, and then we did emails once a week. Um, we also loaded it into a matched audience, and we did that across a couple different advertising platforms. And so we actually did that before we even started running the emails, so that people started to see our posts and our brand, and there was already some recognition then once we emailed them. You can do that on various, like LinkedIn. It's pretty easy to create a matched audience if you have the domains of the companies you're targeting, or even the names. And so, that's a good way to now like create that like base layer of brand awareness before you even reach out. So then you start to get immediate recognition. Um, as far as phone calls, and we've played around with, we used to use a system called Callfire to us, to hit the list and do like automatic dialing and things like that. We've also tested like these voice prompt systems and those kind of things, text messaging, but ultimately like we tended to back off when it came to like incorporating uh, dialing, because just maybe it was more so our situation as an MSP, we just didn't have the capacity to do it. Our salespeople, fortunately for us, were like busy on appointments. You know what I mean? So it's at that point you don't really have, unless you have some kind of admin in place to start doing the dialing and things like that. And so we relied really heavily on more so just creating an inbound stream of leads based off of a combination of email, um, at like social media, matched audiences. We even did like Google matched audiences for campaigns. And then through that system, we even incorporated, like we tested, and actually MailChimp recently released this feature too, where they'll like do automated like mailings and stuff like that. We used a different provider for it. But you could always start to mix that stuff in. And I think the key more so is just, approaching it in a way where you're actually you're not just doing it to do it. You're doing it, you're gauging the response, you're starting to see, you have a clear reason why. And then you're kind of going back to the football analogy. It's like, every email and every touch is really like a play call. And so each scenario is different for that contact as they work their way through the workflow. So like, what are you telling them to do, and why?
Kevin, I just like to double up on that. I really like this question, for cold prospecting, but I want to answer it as cold, warm, or hot, referral, whatever it is. I got to tell you something. If I have someone's phone number, I'm calling it. I mean, that's just maybe that's personality. This is the way I roll. I want as most of direct interaction as possible. I think we've kind of taken off in person, out of it. But I used to have people who would tell me about, hey, I think I know someone who might want your services, and if I had an address, I would just stop by. But these are very aggressive techniques. I realize that, but I just wanted to point that out. And I would probably then, if I had a phone number, I would leave a message if I didn't get someone on the line, or try to talk to someone, or call back until I got a voice to talk to, so I could leave some type of written message, and then I would always follow up with an email immediately to that prospect. So I try to hit them with 2 touches right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we go looking at what inside sales, those numbers were saying too. I mean, it's an interesting question, because I think they have a bunch of sample sales cadence templates they're sharing here, and you can see them here, and they lay out like day 1 do this, day 3 do that, and I think they acknowledge this too. It's not so much that these are the magical combinations that work. It's that you're being consistent with it. And the thing is, like, try out a different cadence, but stick to it for a little while. And what that allows you to do is test results then. If you don't have any consistency around it, things can get really disorganized. It's hard to do. So I think exactly what Kevin was saying. It's more about having. It's helpful to have that in place because it holds you to it, right? and then in terms of the specific with the outbound stuff, I mean, it is consistent with what they're saying too, that it's helpful to do less direct things in the case of some cold leads, although Tom would disagree maybe in some cases, to do something like let's get on their radar, whether that's through making sure we're using ads, in-mails, emails, whatever, before we call them, because at least then when we do, it'll ring a bell. I do see that there's another question here. I think Kelvin's the only one. Well, okay, first of all, if no one has email subject lines they want to share, totally fine. We can pick another way to give away the $50. But as a reminder, if you do have an email subject line that you think is good, put it in that question and answers box. And the most upvoted one will win. But for right now, we've got Kelvin with his dad joke, which I want to know the answer to. And we also have a couple of real questions, which are obviously also good. So Brian, you ask, what kinds of scripts are you using for LinkedIn, speaking of LinkedIn and emails, when reaching out to a decision maker to get the conversation started without being too salesy? So how do you get that ball rolling? I mean, Kevin, I know you write about this a lot.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's a work in progress. Like that platform just changes so much, and so like I've actually just been writing. I have like an article half written about like things you shouldn't include in your LinkedIn DMs, because it's just like the same thing over and over that I'm seeing. The synergy and the let's link up, and like I've been looking at
with you.
Yeah, I've been looking at your profile, the whole thing. It's the way that I treat LinkedIn is like, and both in an outbound and an inbound way is like I'm just subscribing to these people. And so you should start to look at it as to like, why should someone want to subscribe to you? Not necessarily, that should be the value that you're offering. It's not in like that first DM conversation that you have. It's like, what do you post on your feed that's going to be of value to them that now they're going to start paying attention to you? That's always been my approach recently, as I've started to see it become more of like, and the other thing too is they're starting to really favor, it seems like, the like personal profiles posting versus a business account. If your company page has X amount of followers, but you only have, let's say like 300 on your personal, you might actually get more impressions out of it. And so my advice, if I'm doing like social selling and I'm committed to now doing LinkedIn, is don't forget to also post on a regular basis on your feed, because that's the value that you're really offering people. It's not just, hey, I'm going to just hit up your DMs for like a couple months, and then if you don't respond, I'm going to leave you alone. Like that really shouldn't be. Can you kind of like grab a couple opportunities there? Yeah, sure. But I also don't know how many of those will actually close once it comes down to it. You might see that it's a pretty long sales cycle, because ultimately, like, there's no trust there. There's no comfort. The comfort and minimizing their risk, I think, really comes with the content that you're putting out, and you're kind of proving your thought leadership now as you go.
If Kevin and Jonathan, if I were doing an email campaign using LinkedIn right now, I mean, I have a lot of observations on LinkedIn as well. It's a tool that I don't quite understand the directions it goes in, the development, because they seem to go down past one way, and then I right now I'm getting blown up by lead gen companies that I got to tell you, it's funny about it. They do a very ineffective job of trying to sell me their services. I don't need lead gen right now, but they hit me up with all these things about partnering with me and not telling me what they're trying to sell me. And they're often very wordy. I'll tell you what, if I was out there and doing an email campaign in LinkedIn, I would send people a question. I think the power of the questions would come in. I would say, are you having problems with your IT? With not even maybe the intention of an answer, but the intention that they see it and they see my name associated with that question. And so I think that's something, Kevin, you probably insert into a lot of emails that go out in campaigns, are questions to ask people.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, we did an article about, and this is actually a long time ago. I think it was over a year ago. I think I did an article on like formatting a cold email and things like that. And that's really one of the key points I made in that article was like always ending on a question. I think sometimes like and when you're writing an email, it really when you're writing everything, like what's at the surface of your head and like what you want to get across kind of comes out first, and then you start to now try to justify why you're asking that and things like that. And what ends up happening is like you ask the question first, and then like you add all this stuff to the end, and then somebody reads that and they don't know what to do next, you know. And so like I try to always kind of do it the opposite, where you know, always take that question and just put it as the last thing that you say. And so when someone finishes the email, they know exactly how to respond.
So, guys, I really want to get feedback on Ted's comment here, because Ted, I think you're speaking what a lot of us feel. Am I the only one here? No, you're not. That blacklist a vendor that reaches out to us this many times in that short a time frame. If you haven't heard back from us after 2 or 3 attempts, we're either busy or not just not that into you, and it's spam at that point. Yeah, I mean, you know, this is the feeling, right? No one really, at the end of the day, does anyone like getting a sales call? Not if they're not doing it right, and most people aren't really doing it right. So I think the only maybe counter I would propose for that is it definitely depends on, you know, whether you're completely cold, if you're hearing from these people from the first time, you have no context, versus if you had some kind of warm introduction, and then also just what they're sending, right? I mean, this goes back to what you were saying, Kevin. Every time, like, the great salespeople, every time they reach out, they're doing it in a way where it's not salesy. They're providing some kind of value, and I know that's such a cliche thing to say, so maybe we can talk more about what that actually means. But they're doing it more like a person, right? Like the best emails that I respond to in my inboxes are the ones that like they don't read like a sales email. They read like, oh, a human being wrote this, and they're reaching out to me as another human being, you know. But Kevin, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I do think that like, and kind of going back to the frequency thing, it really does is dependent on, you know, how that lead kind of came into the funnel. And so like for perfect example is like an event. Like if you host an event, what you're normally going to do is like, you know, after that event is over, there's going to be like people that are already interested. There's going to be like that low hanging fruit. There's like the one guy that was like, you know, hey, I'm in, you know, kind of let's have a conversation. Now that lead is warm, and that, you know, but then you have all these other people that did attend the event, but they've kind of disappeared afterwards. And so you're going to approach those two situations differently. Now, let's say you have, because they attended the event, you have something to follow up on. So you're asking questions. You say, hey, what did you think of the content, you know, et cetera. And then from there, let's say you get no response. Well, now your touch can become, well, let's just put them into our newsletter that we do on a routine basis. It's purely content, no sales pitch at all. But there's obviously ways for them to now access information if they want it regarding like services we offer, et cetera. And there's a strong call to action there. And so now you can take that person from like, okay, these people were pretty warm. Some of them got warmer, some of them got cooler. And then you start to divide now, like how you take that approach. But, you know, and those may be considered touches. So like you might find that, you know, and you had somebody that was interested for a little bit, they kind of backed off, let's say, and, you know, take the event thing out of the picture. Let's say you had somebody complete your contact form. They got, you know, pretty mad at their existing IT provider. They forgot to like back something up. They lost a bunch of data, and like they were just like, all right, my reaction is I'm gonna go get a quote from this guy, you know. And so they do that. They contact you, and so what happens? Like you give them a quote. They go back. They kind of cooler heads prevail. They don't end up making the switch, and so they tell you that. They say like, yeah, I'm gonna stick with the guy I got. My contract's up, you know, in a year. Maybe I'll reconsider then. And so, what do you do in that situation? Me personally, I wouldn't stop. You know, they've already given me consent to email them. They didn't say I don't contact me anymore. I would always put them into some kind of like nurturing campaign with routine check-ins, maybe on like a quarterly basis, and then subscribe them to like a newsletter so that they continue to see the brand. And so now, if a year comes around, and this is the long game, maybe now that they're actually reconsidering finding a new provider, and your name is going to be at the top of their list because they just, it's going to be hard for them to have forgotten about you. If they don't, if they're not interested, you're happy to unsubscribe from the emails. I mean, that's what it's there for. You know what I mean? I think people get kind of afraid of the unsubscribe and things like that. We always think of it more as like, we only want to be sending emails to people that want them. And so it's actually a good thing when you get unsubscribes because it keeps the engagement on your list up.
Yeah, it's interesting bringing up the newsletter option again. I saw there's a question about plain text versus designed. That's something that is certainly, anytime you talk about sales emails, I think the common consensus now is that plain text is the way to go. But a newsletter email is different, right? And it probably should look and feel different. I think it goes back to the point of like, in terms of the duration, can you imagine if we go back to inside sales, they are recommending like a 10-day cadence to a 14-day cadence for actual sales, direct sales outreach for those sales types of emails. Anything after that, I mean, if you're talking about trying to drag it out for months, how many emails you're going to be writing, I think the newsletter makes way more sense because then you're also not just like finding all these weird reasons to just, come up with all these different sales template emails. You just stick to like the people. Basically, it all comes down to like, okay, let's get people who are ready to go. Let's make sure that they can do that now. For the people who aren't, let's just make sure they have a different path forward. And maybe you give them a couple different paths, but the longer term one is the newsletter. I think it's a great suggestion.
And Jonathan, like we've gotten in trouble before with just struggling to find things to say. And like, I remember we did one where and here's the email subject line was like lunch ? And then, you send that out to like 5,000 people. And we were getting all these responses, and actually, I recall one specifically was like a guy, and in the email it was like, hey, we're going to be in the area, we'd be happy to stop by and like offer you lunch and take care of whatever. So, we got somebody that was like really interested. They're actually like showed some legitimate interest in their services. The only problem was that like we had the wrong address. We had like a UPS box that they had in New York, and the company was like 8 hours away in Boston. And so like it, we kind of had to backtrack out of it and say like, so, but that's the kind of thing is like you kind of want to like wing it because you want to experiment, and that's great. But I think the newsletter is, and the content strategy is like the fail-safe kind of way to, now you can definitely keep somebody warm for a long period of time.
Jonathan and Kevin, I wanted to point out the last couple of years, I spent a lot of time working with MSPs on promoting webinars and lunch and learns. And I would write a series of 3 emails, but then I would write 6 different subject lines. And then we would send out an email. The email cadence was 1 per week over 3 weeks. And then we would repeat, and we would just change the subject line and maybe the first sentence of the email, of each email that went out. And I just wanted to relate that to people so I can take some of the heat off you in terms of thinking how much you have to do, because we're not expecting that everyone is going to read each one of those emails. So you can get away with quite a bit of that and use that effort that you basically put into one time to writing those over maybe a 6-week period or 8-week period.
Yeah, and good point. I mean, in terms of making it more doable, like going back to the 8 to 10 touch thing, that can sound like a lot. But if you're talking about 3 calls, so assuming that you're not going to connect on all of them, you're going to have to leave some voicemails. You may have to navigate with the gatekeeper, but you're making 3 call attempts. You're sending out maybe 2 or 3 emails, and then doing 1 LinkedIn message. If you have templates for all that stuff, and templates in a way where you can customize them still, they're not robotic, I think that's a big challenge. I don't know if you have any advice on that. or if anyone on here too in the chat, I mean, are you guys, do you have templates? Are you do things totally manually? Like, what's the approach there?
Well, I also want to say when I mentioned those emails, I would, one would be for a lunch and learn or webinar. I found that often the content in there, much of it I could reuse, and so I would template that up, because some of it I would talk about the upcoming event, and the rest I would talk to a number of bullet points about the key services that we offer that we're going to discuss during that event, and then I'd have some regular text that talked about my company or that of the MSP when I was doing this for MSPs. So a lot of what you're writing in those emails can be used as a template for future engagements. They also, a lot of that content you put in there can be used for phone calls or for your social engagements as well. So look at this not as, hey, I'm going to have to come up with different content for 8 to 10 touches. A lot of it can be recycled.
I'm as a content person, I'm all about repurposing, reusing as much as I can, slicing things up, and I'm pausing because I'm trying to convince Kelvin, and I think if all of us chant Kelvin silently to ourselves, we can maybe convince him to come on, because I would love to hear from you, Kelvin, or if you don't want to, that's okay. We can get Kevin to talk about it. I would love to hear a little bit more about like making that move from doing all this stuff manually. You're cooking. Multitasking. All right. Well, hopefully it's something good. You can tell us what it is. But yeah, it's sounding like a machine. I mean, this is totally a big concern, because I mean, you look at we all get these emails, right? We all get those LinkedIn email messages where it's like, come on, this is just awful. And so, Kevin, any suggestions for how did you make the move? You got pretty advanced with your MSP in terms of the automation. Like you talked about, you guys maybe went overboard. But when you're first getting started, like what can people do now? And in fact, with what you're doing with MSP Growth Hacks, I mean, you guys are doing some fairly like bootstrappy type of stuff, right?
Yeah, and I guess to touch on what Kelvin's doing right now, it's like, the cooking analogy is like when you get in, like let's say you just create a HubSpot account. Or Agile CRM, like even MailChimp, there's some stuff you can do with automation in there. Like your first instinct is to just automate everything. It's like you just see all these drag and drops and you're just like building and building. It's kind of like somebody cooking and just throwing ingredients together, because they don't really have any experience or knowledge about like technique and things like that. So they try to make up for it with ingredients. And that's kind of like where we were at, is like, how much could we fold into our automation? And it was more just a learning experience of like playing with it, trying to like see what we could do, what responses we could get, and so on. And what I think really what we learned, and really to go back to your point of like not sounding like a machine, one of the things we definitely learned was that dynamic text is like your biggest ally and your biggest enemy. Meaning like when you plug in specific information of, like their industry and their, company name, etc. Because really it's reliant on the quality of your data and how, even down to like formatting. So when I say a company name, I don't put like comma inc dot whatever at the end of it, but like that's how your data might present their company name. You know what I mean? And so like there are ways to where it backfires pretty easily. So like we had, the first thing that we did in order to correct that and sound more human was to format our data in like a more human way. Sometimes it was like with slightly improper punctuation and things like that, but we tried to like go through and make it seem like, okay, this is how we would type this information, not just how it exists in the database. And then you could rely on things like using dynamic text and starting to now approach it. And we did do a combination of plain text and HTML, but the HTML versions, and by the way, you could send both at the same time, and it really just hits whatever the preference of the inbox is. And so our plain text, or I'm sorry, our HTML versions were really simple. They weren't like elaborate. It was more so just like what's in the signature and that kind of thing. But yeah, I think that differentiating between doing the machine, kind of like robot, this and that, asking questions that like only a marketer would ask. What you really should, I think, ask yourself is like, would I respond to this? That's the ultimate judge of whether or not it's a good email. Is like,
you know what? I've got one for you guys right there. I got the first message on LinkedIn I've gotten in months that actually got my attention. Maybe I can read it to you guys real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this person says, "Hey Tom, times are crazy, but the world of podcasting is one way to still connect. My company, Kitcaster, books entrepreneurs on top podcasts. Was curious if that kind of exposure would benefit you based on your profile and niche. Would you be open to a quick call to discuss? Looking forward to connecting." That was a really well-written message, and it got a response from me. And first of all, they weren't telling me they wanted to partner with me or learn about my business, how we could work together. They're flat out telling me that they're selling me something, and I have an appreciation of that. Second of all, says exactly what they do and puts it in my realm of me thinking about how it can help my business and asks a question. But I just thought that was really good.
Yeah, and they make it seem like they've done some research on you too, like based on your profile,
They
based
did.
on so they're indicating they've put in some legwork there. That's a good one. Yeah, I've got some examples too, actually, of some emails, and let's see if I can bring this up. So this is one I got from HubSpot, or a series, I should say, from HubSpot. This is I'm going to create a Ventures and Sales emails doc. Okay, so here we go. So this was back last year, and this actually, whenever we were talking about doing this topic, this stuck out in my mind because I remembered this one. And HubSpot, for those who don't know, they started off as being the inbound marketing company. So they were doing marketing automation and in our CRM, and they're doing lots of stuff in the sales realm too. Maybe some of the folks here use them. But anyway, here's one of the reps. We at Ninja, we do not use HubSpot. I've used it in the past, but we use Pardot, which is owned by Salesforce. And so here we got Evan, who reaches out, and he just says, like, I obviously triggered something by going on to HubSpot and look at their content. He says he can see that I've been checking it out. He lists their basically what they do very succinctly in the bullet points: drive more visitors to the website, convert visitors into qualified leads, nurture those leads into customers. Sounds pretty relevant to our discussion here too. And then he has the easy link for Calendly to set some time in the calendar. Also gives me this, if you don't want to do that, he gives me the second path forward, which is if you're curious about how HubSpot helped other companies, I can go check out case studies. So I was like, this doesn't quite get me because I know that we're not going to move from Salesforce and Pardot because of that integration, but I thought it was still a good email. He follows up a while later, and this is like a few months. So we go from May to August. He somehow found out that we were using Pardot, and I figured out later how he figured it out. But now all of a sudden I'm catching that on, like, okay, he knows that we're using Pardot, and he's starting to do more of a competitive thing. This probably doesn't apply to MSP work so much, but maybe there's some work you could do around pointed emails, speaking to the pain of or the cost of internal IT right now. I mean, there's a lot of companies looking to cut costs. So he sends me something a little bit more targeted. And again, he says, here's some reporting screenshots. Here's a specific thing that Pardot people tell us that Pardot doesn't do as well as HubSpot. Check it out. Then he goes, like, plan on sticking with Pardot. I think he took a guess here to say, like, oh yeah, your renewal is approaching. And this is all hitting me where it's a very relevant time to be reaching out. He's giving new reasons he's reaching out every single time. So it makes sense. It's not just the same thing over and over again. It's the emails that I hate are like, did you see the last email I sent? What do you think about it now? It's just, those are terrible. But he's giving new reasons. He goes one more that's another specific, like, reporting feature. And then the real one that got me was he had signed up for our emails. He signed up for the newsletter, and he just responded to it like a real person. So this is the forward. This is the email that I sent out. That's the subject line for that week's newsletter. He responds to it. I didn't even know it was the same sales guy at first. And so my first response to it was like, oh man, I'm sorry, because he's calling out hey, your unsubscribe's not working. And it's taking forever to redirect to a web page. I'm like, thanks a lot, dude. I'm actually happy that he wrote that. I thought he was just a reader. And so I write back to him. And then I realize, oh, wait, this is Evan from HubSpot. And he lets me know in this last email that he signs up for all of his prospects' email campaigns to know what competitors they're using. And then he's actually giving me some tips on how to like do things better. He actually stopped there, and he could have kept going. He stopped. I mean, we weren't going to switch because I let him know, it wasn't going to happen because of Salesforce and part of integration. But he could have kept going and offering me more. Like, he had his in there where he's more of like a human being. He got my attention. He's now like being very relevant to me. If he had kept following up with like, hey, I'm following your guys' content, I've got some more suggestions and I can connect you some things, I'd still be talking with him right now. He'd become a trusted, helpful resource for me. And then wherever I go, whenever Ninja does decide, if we ever decide to change, or wherever I go next and I'm looking for a CRM, I'm going to go like ring up Evan. So, a different industry, not an MSP, obviously, we can't do the same type of snooping maybe. But I think there's just some good points there of like finding good reasons why you're reaching out every single time. And then just being like inserting yourself in a way where like that one email, it's all lowercase. You're coming off as a real person. You're showing interest. Like maybe some potential prospect clients do have newsletters or they have their own content they're pushing out. Like respond to that and say like, oh yeah, I saw what you're doing there. I have a suggestion, or I had an idea that made me think about something. Show that you're interested in them, and that's going to get really raise your chances of a response.
Jonathan, and one way to maybe apply that to like the managed services use case is just asking. And I actually put this in the ask a question. Is your, and for a subject line, is your managed IT contract up for renewal soon? Just asking that question. They're definitely going to be interested. Now, when you present your email, maybe then you just say, hey, whether you're looking to switch or not, maybe we can offer you a quote, and maybe that can help you negotiate with your existing provider. And so now you might have, let's say you do have somebody that has a contract that's up in a month, 2 months, 3 months, and they have it on their list of things to now reevaluate. And really, you talk about people reevaluating expenses. That's a big thing that almost every business is doing right now. And so, this could be a good maybe opener. And, if you get a quote, that's great. If you get a quote that, maybe doesn't go anywhere, then you have to start thinking about, okay, how am I treating these after the fact? How am I staying relevant for these people now later on? Because obviously you don't want to go through the sales process knowing like, okay, I'm never going to get this deal, but right, I'm still going to do the site surveys. And you know what I mean? Like you don't want to just have them use you for that opportunity to get a better deal with their existing provider. But at the same time, activity is better than no activity. If you're just sitting around with no leads, getting somebody to respond to that email is better than just getting no response.
Yeah, I mean, I like that idea of just stripping away the veneer, right? Like there's so many of these that just come across. Like we all feel this when we get these emails. They're like, just be real with me. And so if you're coming across in that way, I love that idea of like, hey, even if you don't use us, maybe this could help with like talking your own provider down. That's one of those things is like me taking off a salesperson hat and kind of like coming around to your side a little bit and like, hey, we're two people talking now. Like it's just a totally different feel.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, I mean, you probably, as the guy having these conversations with when you owned your MSP, anything else like that you would do to kind of like get out of the, hey, I'm Mr. Robot Salesman to, hey, actually we're just two people talking?
Yeah, well, my big thing is, as I mentioned, the power of the question. Okay? Asking questions about where people are. And the one thing is, I don't ask a lot of questions about the incumbent MSP provider. I ask a lot of questions about what they're experiencing, what could be better, what upgrades they're looking to do, what could be improved. but I don't want to get into discussion comparing my business to another. I want them to verbalize what they're experiencing and what they would like to have happen. So my big thing is taking that personal and then asking a lot of additional questions just about their business, how their business operates. Because my big thing in the way I priced out my managed services and figured out how I was going to approach one, I tried to line up existing clients to what a net new prospect looks like. Because if I had one that was like a similar size and similar needs and computers at similar age, I very quickly could usually close those deals because I would know what to talk about, what questions to ask, and what to quote.
So I've got, I'm looking at the clock here and see that we went past 2. Let's keep this going. If you want to stick around, we've got some questions that we haven't answered. Happy to keep it going. And if you want to take this time too, if there's a question that you're not realizing you want to ask, feel free to jump in there. Also, if there's something that that we didn't cover here that you wish that we would have, more examples, anything like that, feel free to put that in either in the chat or the questions too. And we can either try to cover it real quick or we can use it as a topic for next time. But I see, Hayden, you asked, with all the vendors that MSPs deal with, they all have their own curated content for MSPs to sell with and to white labeled stuff, right? Is there a process or tool that others have used to take advantage of this while curating your own human-like emails? And I love this question too, because this is something that I think about as the content person at Ninja. One of the big requests from me joining was let's give more white labeled stuff for our partners. And on the face of it, awesome. Sounds great. But I always kind of wondered, are people actually going to use this? If we just give them a PDF or a Word doc or whatever, and it's got this templated language, it's something I'm always curious about. And I ask about MSPs. I mean, I would love to let me know in the chat right now. I mean, do you use white labeled stuff? Is it actually valuable? It's something that I keep on trying to think about, how can I actually make that more usable? And one thought I had recently was, rather than just creating standard stuff, is kind of creating maybe a gallery of icons or a gallery of stats, basically making the pieces where people can build things a little bit, people can take things and build them on their own, making that part a little bit easier. But there's a ton of tools that you can use, and this actually, I'm going to try my best not to come off as a complete shill here, but Kevin, this goes completely into your thoughts around MSP Spark and what you talk about. So actually, let me pull this up on the screen. I've got an example of one of your emails. And why don't you go ahead and tell people about kind of what the thought was behind that while I find that.
Yeah, so MSP Spark, which by the way, I changed the code. Somebody said in the chat that the code wasn't working. I don't know why it wasn't working, but I changed it to a 40% off for life now. So Ninja, and it works. I tested it. We're good. But MSP Spark is basically what we wanted to do is give. We found that one of the articles that performed really well on mspgrowthhacks.com was always when we just gave ideas and here, try to create this content, or here's a few things you should do that your audience would engage with. And so we thought why can't we just do that and just put that out as a premium version of the newsletter, to where now we put a ton of thought and effort into creating 10 ideas per week of these little bites, and they're normally with and you can see this is one of our more recent ones. And so we do social media, we do blog ideas, video ideas, and we do a lead magnet, and then we do some kind of bonus. And the bonus is always some kind of random, sometimes silly thing. And we have a lot of fun with it. But really what it does, and the cool thing is after we started putting this out and kind of growing the user base for this specifically, we're starting to really see, and specifically me in my LinkedIn feed, of 2 MSPs creating the same piece of content from the same idea, but they look totally different. And so but really we try to take it as far as we possibly can, even giving them places to research, where to, how to create it, etc. And then so they don't, and that's one of the struggles I think that has and I learned this from working in a coaching relationship with MSPs, is like having those ideas to run with is always a struggle. And so this is kind of like our way of solving that problem of to now, here's just the ideas. And it's just a few bucks a month, and just to so that we can obviously justify sending it out. And it's far better than putting your brand on a template and then calling it a day. You know what I mean? That's been the response that we've got.
Yeah.
And so our goal is to really just be constantly improving it, which we have like every single week. Like when we first started, we realized like, oh, well, people wouldn't know like what to use to create this image that like has for this statistic. And so we like research tools that like were free or inexpensive that now they can go use. And so like we're just kind of evolving it every week. But the cool thing is like we're really starting to see how people are now taking it and producing content. Some people legitimately have put out like 50% of it, from what I see, on their channel. And we're talking about people that are like active MSPs that just maybe like they're not a huge company with a marketing department. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you have like you're pointing to what to use. You're pointing to where to research, what to use, Canva. Like you make it introduced to some, like all these tools are basically designed to like be low cost. Some of them have free versions. But yeah, just make things easy, which is what I like about it. And the fact that you have 10 every week, I mean, you and I were talking about it. I was trying to convince you to cut it down to 5 or something. But you're a very generous guy. And so you've kept it at 10. It's a ton of stuff like every week. It's awesome. I like it.
Yeah, and so to tie that into kind of like what we're talking about now is like if you are, let's say you really like the idea of like creating a newsletter, but obviously every single week now you don't know where to take that. Like you're just like, what do I do? And now I have to sit here and come up with something to say. This is a good start. Or even if you don't want to sign up for Spark, like just maybe research like here's a statistic that I think a business owner it would help them make a decision this week. Or here's like an update that's coming that could like break the way that, for example, one of the ones we mentioned was like the Skype interoperability with Teams. And, now like Skype, obviously that date's coming up to where they're going to do like an end of life on that service. And like, I think it's like a year from now. And so like starting to create those narratives of like, okay, if you want to get people to switch to Teams, here's some content and just little bites of information that you can send out every week to help them make better decisions. And that's kind of how you should be looking at it. And you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to be super creative when it comes to like putting that content together. I think even if you've never written anything in your life, if you go into it saying, I just want to provide valuable information, and even if it's in the most abbreviated form possible, I think it's still better than sending nothing.
So guys, I mean, we're at 2:15 here, and Tom, Kevin, I mean, happy to keep going if you guys are. If you have other questions, let us know. Otherwise, I do, before we go any further, we should address what's going to happen with this $50 Amazon gift card.
I think
Because
Kevin,
I just,
actually.
well, we can't do that. I mean, come on, this is completely rigged. I just launched a new poll, and it's should Kelvin win the $50 for his octopus joke? I'm gonna let the jury decide here, Kelvin. I mean, it is technically right now it's tied with you, and Kevin can't win. So let's look at one of these subject lines. Come on, we can help Kelvin out later.
Why don't we pull up the subject line and then collectively write the email?
Ooh, I like it. Okay. Well, so now, okay, up ahead we have John with 2 votes for your subject line of like, I want to get some clarification, John, if you're still there. Is it just the first name and that's it? Because I totally see your point about using someone's first name in the subject line. I think it's great. It totally gets your attention. But is that all you're doing? You're just doing the name and that's it? Or is the name and something else? Yes to both. If it's just the name, I mean, I don't know. I think that might creep me out more than anything. Maybe others have different opinions. But I do think your point is a good one. And in the interest of time, in the interest of also not awarding Kelvin for his octopus joke, even though I really like it and I do think it's funny, and I'm going to tell my wife that, and she's going to groan and roll her eyes. I think we should award this to John because I think it's a great point. I mean, using a first name, company name, of course, will work too, but it gets that personalized thing, and it's definitely going to stand out and get your attention. Now, that said, what are guys' thoughts about? So, congratulations, John. Before we go on, you've won, sir. I appreciate you contributing. I appreciate you being here, and we'll reach out right after this to make sure you get that $50 gift card. So, congratulations, John. Now, okay. That said, what about gimmicks? Like, I'm not sure. Maybe there's gimmicks on this on the call side, but certainly in email, like I've seen a lot of things. Maybe it hasn't. It's kind of gone away a little bit, but people using like replies, like putting the RE in front of it when it's not really an actual reply to get people's attention more. That certainly works to get my attention, but then when I open it up and I see it's a sales email, I feel duped, and so I'm not sure it's that effective for me anyway, personally. You guys have any thoughts about that, or other things like using emojis and things?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of tests with the emoji, specifically like more so on our newsletter than anything else. Like we actually found that there was a difference. It was in favor of the emoji, but to me, like, and I've actually seen it before where it's like ends up just looking like a question mark, where it's like the browser, or I guess the email client doesn't pick it up. And so, yeah, I mean, I really think that going back to your point is like, if it's a gimmick and even if it works, does that help you actually get a response? Because your open rate might be up, but then like what happens to your click rate now if people like more people open the email, but then they're just like, oh, I've been duped, you know? Right. The other thing is like, so just using the first name, for example, like let's say it was just, and it was dynamic. So it was automatically filling it in. You've seen, I'm sure, where there's like people that fill out a form and they fill it out wrong or whatever. Like if anything, that might be a dead giveaway for a lot of people. You know what I mean? And so I would kind of just going back to Tom's point of like power of the question. That's what I find. Like my natural instinct is to like ask the question first. Like as the subject line. Like if you have a really strong question, I feel like your probability of getting it open is pretty strong. But then like how do you then follow that up so that they know how to respond to the email?
If you have something like a thought-provoking image in there of some type, or something that personalizes a little bit, as you said, shows knowledge about my business in some way. But if you are doing gimmicky things and emojis or playing around with the subject line, REs and forwards and stuff like that, your credibility is lost with me from then on, and I'm probably gonna delete it, and I'm probably gonna block you. So that's my thing, is that I want to see, and I will often respond to someone that I see does thoughtful, as you were showing, Jonathan, thoughtful emails over a period of time, and maybe even tunes into something particular. As you said, what I read off of LinkedIn, this person probably knew that I was on podcasts and other types of web content, and they tuned into that. And that makes me feel good, because I talked to someone on the phone last week from LinkedIn, and this guy had acted like he knew what MSPs were in the previous email. But I thought maybe there was something wrong with it. Within 5 minutes of the call, I realized the guy didn't even know what the 3 letters meant. And so, how much good did it do him to actually try to fake it? Did him no good at all, because he is blocked forever by me on LinkedIn. and I even sent his stuff around to a couple of people. It was like, watch out for this guy. So that'd be my thing, is stay credible, get your messaging clear to people, don't fall for gimmicks, because once you get caught doing a gimmick in some way, it's not going to work out well. And especially for MSPs, where you're working in a region where people can talk about you, you don't want to get caught up in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes up a lot here in our chats and in other forums too. There's a lot of just basic truth to the idea that you're just trying to be real with people and trying to be friendly, make connections that way, build relationships. I mean, we're always looking for stats, data to inform us, and like the next best trick and everything. But ultimately, I think a lot of it does come down to just building a relationship, and the way you do that is by being real with people. Now that said, I do want to pull up one thing I promised, and because Kevin mentioned my making fun of my memes. Can you guys hear this?
We don't get the audio.
Well, you guys got the link. That's George explaining that the way he operates, he sticks around long enough. He's like a radio jingle. It's annoying at first, but then after a while, it gets stuck in your head, and you're like, Costanza. I mean, it's basically like sticking around long enough. Everyone's giving me the nopes. But like you stick around, long enough, and you're real with people. You're actually giving them real reasons why you're around, and then you put yourself in the position to be there when the time is right for them. And that's what nurturing is all about. So, guys,
I just want to point out real quick, John, John Gibson noted in here he thought plain text was most effective, but I thought that Kevin made a good point that you can send in both basically, and the preference on the email client is going to pick what that person and how that person likes to see it in terms of those messages going out.
Yeah, I mean there are some statistics about plain text. I think it goes back to like the more that you can look like an email that you're going to get.
I'm talking about how what Kevin mentioned. I think it plays into this better, because my feeling is if someone wants to see them in place, it would. But I would prefer to get something in HTML that has a little more visual aspects. I can see more to it.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely one approach. I mean the other approach is that looking like an email that you're getting from like all the other emails in your inboxes. I mean, it's kind of counterintuitive in that way. Like maybe, and you're right, like maybe you try out different things, and that's ultimately the answer. You try out HTML, you try to stand out more. That can get your attention. At the same time, it can also set off the alarms like, oh, it's a sales email. And if it's plain text and looks just like another email that like for a second you're like, oh, is this something that like I forgot about? Is this from someone that I know? And then all of a sudden you're reading it. I can see some effectiveness there too. It's probably just a matter of just trying things out.
Yeah, you're trying to beat the spam filter too,
Right.
So it's not just trying to get the open, you're also trying to beat the spam filter to even get the shot of getting it open. So there are things that go into that with like link density, and for example, like an HTML, like a plain text email has like links in there like natural state, and so those are a little more, like you're not going to get somebody that I think clicks through as high on like a naked link than somebody that has like a strong anchor text, etc. And so, but if you look at probably the way spam thresholds work and what they might favor, they'll probably favor the naked link over one with like anchor text. And so, yeah, like you have to really play around with those and try. And a perfect example is like with MSP Spark. It was new for us in the beginning. We actually, the first week that we sent it out, we had realized like we basically had a low delivery because we had too many links in it. You know what I mean? And so we had to actually start stripping away links for even just for that, just because it was, what you really care about is the deliverability of it above all, because if you even want a shot of somebody opening and responding, you have to get it to their inbox and not somewhere else.
Well, guys, I think This has been great. Thanks everybody for sticking on. I love it when we go over and people are still here. If there's any other questions, you can follow up. I'll pull up the doc one more time and go back up to the top. So you know how to get in touch with Tom. We got his email right here. And then Kevin, you know where to find him too over at MSP Growth Hacks. And definitely there's that, I'll remind everybody of the promo too. The free 40 days of MSP Spark is a cool thing to check out.
Yeah, Jonathan, I mentioned before, but I changed it 40% off for life.
Okay.
And, yeah, I just want to thank everyone for today. I wanted to point out, yes, you can reach me at tw@mspgo.com. And also I do some MSP consulting. Somewhat in the marketing realm. It was more event-based, which isn't going on much, but also operations. And also, I'd say my specialty is pricing out managed service agreements and the actual managed service agreement.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody, we're going to be just as a reminder too. So this is an ongoing series. So we're have a new page up where we have a few of the different upcoming sessions already listed. And so I should probably pull that up while I'm talking about it. But you can see now that you've registered in here, you don't have to register again. We'll just send you an email about a week before the next session. We're going to try to keep this on a bi-weekly schedule. And the next session is going to be a really cool one where we're going to have our general manager of EMEA, also one of our sales executives, Andre Schindler, is going to be here, and he's going to walk through basically the anatomy of a great sales call, a great sales meeting. And so that's going to be another sales-focused one. Feel free to share around, let everybody know about it. And then if you also have any other requests for other topics you want us to cover, just respond to the email that I'm sending out. Let me know. I'd love to hear about it. But in the meantime, thanks, everybody. We're going to close out the session. If you want to watch the recording, you should be able to come back within like literally a minute, and you can see the recording. You'll also have the Google Doc. And any questions, just let us know. But Kevin Clune, thank you so much for joining us. This was awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and
Thank
Tom,
you.
thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks, everybody. Have a great one.